Okay, so this is a mini lecture of the nitrogen cycle. I'm not really planning to make a video of the carbon cycle or the water cycle because I feel like their level of complexity doesn't really warrant that. But before I discuss the nitrogen cycle with you, I wanted to explain a few things about nitrogen. First of all, 78% of the atmosphere is nitrogen, and it is one of the 7 diatomic elements. Like oxygen always travels in pairs, nitrogen does as well. The difference is that nitrogen is actually triple bonded, which makes it very, very hard to break that bond and break nitrogen gas down and put it into other compounds. So it's very unusual for an organism to be able to do that. So we're going to start the nitrogen cycle at N2, at atmospheric nitrogen. Of course, with a cycle, you could really start it anyway, but logically, it kind of makes sense to start with N2. So the first organisms that are involved are nitrogen-fixing bacteria. They take nitrogen from the gas form in the atmosphere and fix it into a solid form, into ammonia. They are the first organisms that actually make nitrogen almost available for living things in an ecosystem. It's not quite ready yet because nitrogen fixers make ammonia, which most living organisms can't use. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria live in the soil, but some of them actually live right in the roots of certain group of plants called legumes. You're familiar with soybeans and lentils. And a lot of the plants that have high protein content are actually these legumes that have these nitrogen-fixing bacteria living in their roots because it basically boosts their nitrogen power, and they are actually able then to make amino acids and then proteins with that nitrogen. Once we have ammonia in the soil, nitrifying bacteria convert ammonia into nitrites, which is NO2, and actually nitrates. There are many different types of bacteria that can convert ammonia into nitrites, but there is only one group of bacteria that can convert nitrites into nitrates, so it's actually even more uncommon. But you can think of nitrifying bacteria as the kind of bacteria that make nitrogen available for the living things in the ecosystem because nitrates are going to be used by plants. Plants take the nitrates and use it to make amino acids, and with that they make proteins. In addition to that, there are also nitrogen bases in DNA, so they're also going to need nitrogen to make DNA. So once the plants have made plant protein, animals eat them. So here I have arrows going from a corn plant and legumes to a cow. It really could have been any animal, including humans. So then, when plants and animals die or produce waste, decomposers break down plant tissue or animal tissue or our waste, whether it is solid waste like the little poop in that diagram or whether it is urine. But decomposers break down protein, well, the amino acids actually break them down all the way into ammonia. That ammonia is the very potent smell that you might smell if you were scooping a litter box. And it doesn't come out of the cat smelling that way. It's after bacteria break it down. We learned in the fall that decomposers are unique because they can take organic compounds and break them all the way down into inorganic compounds. And in truth, all organisms can do that with carbohydrates. We all break down glucose, C6H12O6, into CO2. It's actually really where in the breakdown of proteins where decomposers are really unique. When we eat meat or we digest something, we break the proteins down into amino acids. So imagine it's like a string of beads. We break the string of beads into individual beads, but these decomposers can break down kind of the individual building blocks, the beads themselves, even smaller. So they actually break down amino acids into ammonia, which is an inorganic compound. Now you see lightning. Lightning strikes in the air can actually add nitrates to the soil. And actually, if you go and you look on the internet, you'll find a wide variety of different compounds that different really reliable websites will claim that lightning can make. And it sort of stands to reason that it would really make lots of different nitrogen compounds. If you think about the fact that you had all those compounds that we were talking about in the previous slide, where you had 78% nitrogen, but there was also oxygen and water vapor in the atmosphere, that it's possible that given enough electricity, enough energy, that several different compounds would form. But we're going to go with lightning forming nitrates. And as long as you know that lightning can make nitrogen available for the ecosystem, in addition to those nitrogen fixing bacteria and nitrifying bacteria, you know what you need to know for our unit test. Now, the cycle is complete with denitrifying bacteria. Denitrifying bacteria release nitrogen into the air, back into the original form it was in the form of N2. Now, I think the trickiest thing about this cycle is not confusing nitrifying and denitrifying bacteria. You can think of denitrifying bacteria as denitrifying or removing nitrogen from the soil, and nitrifying bacteria as making or nitrifying the ecosystem. It makes the form of nitrogen that plants most need. Denitrifying bacteria make less nitrogen available for plants, and so it really strips the soil of its fertility. It also produces one of the greenhouse gases, nitrous oxide, NO2. So, we need denitrifying bacteria, but we kind of are, to complete the cycle. But our favorite bacteria are the nitrogen fixers and the nitrifying bacteria. Now, in terms of for your unit test, you should assume that you're going to get a diagram that's a little bit different than this diagram, but fairly similar. There are a wide variety of different looking or different kinds of nitrogen cycle diagrams, and they're very complex. This is certainly oversimplified. And so what you need to focus on is the nitrogen fixers and the decomposers. Those one you definitely need to know. So if you see an arrow coming from air to soil, you know we're talking about nitrogen fixing bacteria. Or I guess it could also be going from the air to the root nodules on legumes. If you see air to the soil and you see a lightning bolt, then they're obviously talking about lightning, or if they talk about an abiotic factor that adds nitrogen to the soil, because lightning is abiotic and bacteria are living, so therefore biotic. With the decomposers, if you see any arrow going from an animal or plant or waste, or the word waste, whether it's a picture or a word, into the soil, you've got decomposers. And we are not likely on our test to ask you to distinguish between denitrifying and nitrifying bacteria, but we could ask you that at these two stages, or that either of these stages, that bacteria are involved. Just sort of to wrap up, what we're really supposed to be focusing on with the nitrogen cycle is the wide variety of different important things that bacteria do. Before you came into a biology class, you probably only thought of bacteria as something that gives you strep throat or ear infections. And when we talked about photosynthesis, you learned that there are photosynthetic bacteria that are producers. We call those cyanobacteria. But now you know that there are nitrogen-fixing bacteria and nitrifying bacteria and denitrifying bacteria, and they are all very important in the ecosystem in order to cycle nitrogen so that we can grow plants for food.